Have you ever wondered why Jesus' disciples didn't always recognize him after he rose from the dead? I mean, these were the people who knew him best, walked with him, talked with him, and yet he showed up in forms they didn't even recognize. Why did that happen? In this video, we're diving into some incredible moments in the Bible where Jesus appeared to his followers in completely different forms. And trust me, there's a lot we can learn from this. So stick around, because what we're about to uncover just might change the way you see how God shows up in your life today. First up is the story of the two disciples on the road to Emmaus. This is in Luke 24, verse 13 to 31. These two disciples were walking along the road talking about everything that had happened in Jerusalem, Jesus being crucified and all that. They're confused, sad, and not sure what's going on. While they're walking, this stranger comes up to them and starts walking with them. Now we know it's Jesus, but here's the thing, they didn't recognize him. They're having this deep conversation about the scriptures, and this stranger, who's really Jesus, starts explaining everything to them, like how all the stuff that happened was supposed to happen according to the scriptures. It's wild, right? They're walking with the risen Jesus, but it's like he's in some form that they just can't recognize. It's only later when they sit down to eat with him that their eyes are opened. In verse 30 to 31, it says that when Jesus broke the bread and gave it to them, suddenly their eyes were opened and they recognized him. But as soon as they recognized him, he disappeared from their sight. Just like that, he was gone. This shows that after Jesus rose from the dead, he wasn't always appearing the way people were used to seeing him. He had this transformed, glorified body. Another time we see this is when Jesus appeared to Mary Magdalene. This story's in John 20, verse 14 to 16. So Mary is at the tomb. She's upset, crying because she thinks someone has taken Jesus' body. She looks into the tomb, and there's two angels sitting where Jesus' body had been, and they ask her why she's crying. Then she turns around and sees Jesus standing there. But get this, she doesn't recognize him either. She thinks he's the gardener. It's not until Jesus says her name of Mary that she realizes it's him. Think about that for a second. Mary knew Jesus well, but in this moment, she didn't recognize him until he spoke her name. So again, Jesus appears in a different form than what people are expecting. So, why is Jesus appearing in these different forms? Well, we can see that after his resurrection, he wasn't limited by the same physical body he had before. In Mark 16, verse 12, it says, "Afterward, Jesus appeared in a different form to two of them while they were walking in the country." Jesus now has this glorified body. He can appear however he wants, and people don't always recognize him right away. It could be that Jesus was teaching his followers to recognize him not just by physical appearance, but by his voice, by his actions, and by his presence. Like with Mary, she didn't know it was him until he called her by name. This can teach us something important today. Sometimes we're looking for Jesus or for God to show up in a specific way, maybe the way we're used to seeing him or feeling him, but he might show up in a totally different form. We have to be open to recognizing him in new ways, whether through people, situations, or experiences we weren't expecting. Jesus is not limited by our expectations. He can reveal himself however he chooses, and it's up to us to have open hearts and eyes to recognize him, just like those disciples and Mary eventually did. Now, if you think about it, this idea of Jesus appearing in different forms can really hit home for us today. Let's take a moment to dig into what this means in our own lives. See, we might not physically walk with Jesus like the disciples did, but we're still looking for him, right? We're all searching for God in some way, whether we're going through something tough or we just want to feel his presence more. But here's the thing, we often expect him to show up a certain way. Maybe we're waiting for a big, clear sign or for something miraculous to happen. But just like with the disciples on the road to Emmaus, Jesus doesn't always show up the way we expect. Sometimes he shows up quietly. Maybe through a friend's kind word or a moment of peace in the middle of chaos. Other times it could be a shift in perspective or understanding. Something clicks and we realize he's been with us the whole time, even though we didn't recognize him right away. Remember how Mary didn't know it was Jesus until he called her by name? That's a powerful reminder that Jesus is personal. He knows us by name, and he's close even when we don't see him clearly. We might be too focused on our problems, or maybe we're just not looking in the right direction, but He's there. The key is learning to recognize Him, not by what we expect to see, but by how He moves in our lives. It might be subtle, but when He speaks, when He calls us by name, it's undeniable. So what can we take away from this? First, don't box God in. Don't limit how He can show up in your life. Be open. Sometimes God is right there in front of us, but we miss Him because we're looking for something else. Let's start paying attention, like those disciples eventually did, and be ready for God to show up in ways we never imagined.